Hi, Jeremy here, Modern Vitality. In today's video, we're looking at the 3 levels of stress resilience. Now, this is really important because no matter what kind of health condition you're dealing with, if it's something inflammatory or you've got a hidden pathogen component and you're getting these symptoms all over the place, right? Brain fog, fatigue, weird pains, there's oftentimes a stress correlate. So no matter what your diagnosis, fibromyalgia, Lyme disease, mold exposure, there's a ton of these things. Long haulers, there's a ton of different diagnoses. But when we zoom out, what's the common element? Well, we've got a human being. Of course, we have a human being, and human beings, no matter what disease, no matter what symptoms, human beings are exposed to stress. And very often, the stress component is one part only of a modular system of other inputs that are also affecting your health, your symptoms, right? So when you have a shrinking world, when you say, oh, I can't travel, I can't make plans, I can't be spontaneous, I can't commit to things, I can't go out to dinner, I can't go dancing, I can't. That happens because of the symptoms, because everything's affecting your energy levels, your fatigue, your confidence in yourself, right? There's a whole chain of events here. Those symptoms are coming from different types of triggers. One of those triggers, there's multiple triggers, and you can look at other videos I have where I go through all the different types of triggers so that you can categorize that. We do a lot of work in that in our vault too, with our interactive videos. That's for our group. But you can look at all these triggers, and one of them is stress. Okay, so why I'm going so big on this is because this affects everybody. And the better you get at handling stress and becoming stress resilient, then the better you're going to be able to start to heal without every time you get a stress trigger, you're set back and flared up, right? Or something happens and now you can't get it off your mind and you're over adrenalizing yourself over and over again for a week after a stressful encounter, right? Some of this happens because there's physiology involved, meaning we have certain stress hormones, we have cortisol, we have adrenaline or epinephrine, right? We have these things that are released from stressful events. And depending on your health, depending on your state of your immune system, digestive system, neuroadrenals, blood circulation, hormones, all of it, right? Depending on your mitochondrial health, you'll be able to do different things with stress. You'll be able to process it differently. So what I'd like to share here and outline is something I've observed working with many different types of humans with many different types of stress related conditions, right? Even if you have hidden pathogens and all that, stress is going to be a factor. It's going to be a trigger. And I've seen now patterns where people have 3 distinct levels that they go through in terms of our ability to become stress resilient. So if you understand all these 3 levels, you can take an honest look, and this is where you're going to get the most out of this video, is to take an honest look at yourself and try to figure out where you're at in terms of these 3 different levels. Do you move around these 3 different levels throughout the day, throughout the week, depending on the situation, right? Are you really good? Are you like level 3 on some types of stressors, but you get sent right back to level 1 on other types? And can we learn from that? Can you start to present that type of resilience to different situations? So to get the most out of this video, grab a notebook, grab a pen, make some notes, okay? Because you can watch this over and over and over again as many times as you need to. But of course, having your own notes on this stuff is going to be more powerful. Put it into your journaling system, whatever you have for your self-development, and start integrating these ideas and get these distinctions so you can start to evolve the way you handle stress. And of course, there's going to be limitations. When people are stuck in highly inflammatory conditions and these loops, oftentimes your stress threshold is very, very small. I've explained this in other videos. I have one on stress versus trauma, how to differentiate those 2 things. Usually stress is actually a gift. It's a gift, it's a growing opportunity. We get triggered from stress because we're trying to learn something about our environment. We're trying to learn a better way to be in the world, right? This sounds very lofty. So I'm going to give you in this video very grounded day-to-day examples so we can take a look at these 3 levels, how they play out. You can take an honest assessment of yourself, see where you're at, how you handle stress, and all this is so that you can start to make stress triggers become one less thing you really need to worry about when you're trying to get your health back. All right, let's get started. The other day I was in a bit of traffic and there was a lady waiting to pull out, and there's a lot of kind of stop and go traffic. It was really busy. The county fair was going on and our small town here was just packed full of cars. And there was a lady waiting to go out. So I stopped and I let her go out. And what she really wanted to do, I thought she was going to take a right in front of me, but she really wanted to cross traffic and the other lane wasn't stopping. And so I saw her getting frustrated and she looked at me and she knew, she's like, I can't go. And then I saw her getting upset and I could see her wringing her hands in her car, right? I could see her frustrated because here she had an opportunity, somebody stopped, but the other people hadn't stopped, so she couldn't get out, right? And this isn't about what a kind driver I am, right? It's not about that. It's about what I got to observe because of that. I got to see her sit at the steering wheel and looking and really wanting to go. And then, oh, she did like that, right? Clenched jaw, clenched fingers, shaking. Yeah. Obviously frustrated. Okay. We can take these kind of human subconscious communications. You don't have to be a rocket scientist or an expert in behavioral psychology or micro expressions, or you don't have to be an expert in that to see somebody doing this and visibly tensing their jaw. You can guess how they're feeling inside, right? This is not a victory dance, right? This is stress. And what I noticed with that, what I observed, it's very interesting because here we have somebody who's feeling that stress and she's letting it out instead of stuffing it down, right? Because either way, she's got the stress of what she wants versus what's happening. There's conflict there. She's feeling that, but she's not just internalizing it and stuffing it down, right? She's actually letting it out, and she's doing some physiological responses that are actually helping her body metabolize stress hormones. These are some of the things we look at within our group. We go into more depth here, and even taking a 4-stage process where we go through immune system, digestive system, neuroadrenals, right? That's where we really get stage 3. That's where we really get some of these stress responses. Stage 4 is the blood circulation and tissue repair, right? But this is the process. If you're at all familiar with my work, you've seen me speaking about this over and over and over again. And usually the people I work with, by the time they get to stage 3, we start to really explore a lot of these physiological stress release type responses, like clenching your teeth, clenching your jaw. Where does that come from? Why is she doing that? What's the evolutionary history here? What's the benefit for her today, right? Why is this happening? Why is she outletting stress? Tension, shaking, right? What does shaking do to stress hormones? It's really quite interesting. These things that she's doing in her car, while she may feel kind of embarrassed, or if somebody was riding with her, they'd be like, hey, you're really losing your cool, right? But for her, she's actually discharging that. She's letting it out so that it's not inside of her tearing her up, okay? So what I'll tell you here is that it's interesting because do you want to be the person who's just there stoic and not having that response, or do you want to be the person who can shake and let it out, right? And guess what? There's more than just 2 options. So in this video, I want to present you 3 levels, and I'll tell you this is level 2. This lady was at level 2 when I observed. So the first level is stress is not pleasant, and oftentimes if we have a low threshold, right, whether we've had trauma or just too many stresses, like a lot of them, one after the other, and we get neurologically overwhelmed, which happens a lot with complex chronic health conditions, which is why I'm speaking about it, right? Part of my job isn't to just talk about spirochetes and mycotoxins and things like that. Part of my job is to wrap this condition, clinical condition, right? Wrap that in the actual humanity that surrounds it. And part of our human experience is that we have stress. And part of our human experience is we can become neurologically overwhelmed. We have a very low threshold. Again, I have a different video on that separate. It's a stress versus trauma. You can look that up on my channel here, and you'll find it where I've got my little board out and I'm outlining all these things. So just know it's normal for people to have a very low threshold of what they can take, especially if you're kind of burned out, overwhelmed, etc. What that means is everything becomes a trigger, a stress trigger. And what people often do in this situation when they're at level 1 is they start to remove themselves from society. They start to remove themselves from potential stressors. They start to say no to a lot of things. And this starts to snowball into what we call the shrinking world, where basically you've become a recluse. And even if you're kind of introverted, kind of like it quiet in general, right? You're a little bit more of an empath, so you get around things and you feel things a lot stronger than some of the other people that you know, you tend to be more sensitive in that regard. Even if you have these personality traits, you still don't want to be trapped, right? It's nice to be able to have the freedom to come out of your shell once in a while on your own terms, instead of feel like you have to push the world away because every stimulus is a threat. Every stimulus is a potential trigger, right? There's stress everywhere. And this happens because usually when people find me, they're in somewhere in this early state where it is seriously, everything is a potential trigger, right? They just don't have a lot of tolerance built up, which is totally fine, right? That's why I exist. That's why I'm doing this kind of work, is to meet people at that stage. So there's no shame, there's no judgment on where you're at. But if you're feeling this way, and the typical response is to start isolating and remove yourself from the environment and try to control the external environment as much as you can, usually by removal, right? So this lady in traffic, if she was in that stage, she wouldn't be in traffic. She would have looked and said, the county fair is going on. I'll leave the house a different day. I'm not going to mess with it. I don't want it anywhere near me, right? It's self-preservation at that point. But this lady I observed, right? Lovely lady. I don't know anything about her except what I observed, but we're using her as an example here. She's not at that state. She's at the state where she's going out into the world, right? So we have this kind of freeze state going on. Level 1, stress, right? Here's your response. Here's how you manage it. Here's how you find some control in an uncontrollable world. Level 1, freeze. You freeze your life and you try to stay away from everything, okay? This is a short-term strategy at best. However, if people don't understand how to heal, how to get better, and how to increase their capacity, this short-term strategy tends to become a long-term lifestyle, and it kind of can start to bake into your identity. So I've actually met a lot of people who, empaths, introverts, right, like it quiet, they've identified with that. And then when they start healing and getting a little bit more power back and a little more resilience back and a little bit of a wider margin between stimulus and the threshold of where they're going to break, right? All of a sudden they realize there are other parts of their personality. Yes, they have highly sensitive empathic traits, and they also do like to go out and socialize sometimes. They also do like to be out in crowds sometimes, and they can actually get energized by being in a coffee shop sometimes. If they're feeling fatigued, they can kind of be around other people that are hustling and bustling a little bit, and that actually lifts them up. It's good for their spirit. Yeah. People who are introverted, as it turns out, a lot of times they just haven't been around the right people that lift them up, right? So then you start to break through this, you get to this next level and you go, okay, yeah, I do want to be out in the world a little bit with certain folks, right? With my tribe, with people that lift me up, right? With the right folks. So that's an important caveat. So what I've noticed here is that all these things that we do as a short-term kind of fix, if left unattended, it can start to bake in and become an identity, which doesn't necessarily define you. Right? You don't have to be an introvert, which means you just hide in your house all day and never go anywhere, because any interaction will just break you, right? That may be where you're at now, which is fine. Just know there are other people who are in that same position and have moved through it and have a greater expansion on life. I know this because I see it every day in our group. So level 1, freeze, right? Freeze everything, isolate from the world, separate, okay? Level 2 is where we go out into the world. Right? We engage with the world and all the stressors that it brings. So when you have level 2 stress resilience, that means you are not hiding in your house, you're out there in the world, right? And you're getting these stressors. And now when you're in level 2, you're not afraid of the exposure, but you do have 2 different options, right, that you can take. One option is that when you get these stressors, you take them and you internalize them and you pretend they don't bother you. Right? So the lady driving, if she was feeling these emotions and frustration and all this and seeing that, oh, there's my chance. I've been waiting so long and finally somebody stopped, but nobody else is stopping. I can't get across. Oh, and she feels that rising up. And instead of the shaking and all that, she just stuffs it back down, right? Internalizes it, compartmentalizes it, freezes it, right? Never processes it. Okay. This is kind of like doing some level 1 stress resilience, but you're at level 2. You're just freezing it in there, right? So you need to be able to take that and not just isolate it, but also do as this lady did and move it through you, right? Release it. So in a sense, what's happening is we have a fight or flight response going on, because we're not frozen from the world. We're not at level 1. We're at level 2. We're engaging with the world, and we have a little bit of a fight or flight, meaning we can try to flee from it once it happens and just tuck it away somewhere in our body, because we know that's what happens. We somaticize, right? Somaticize our stress, which that's a mouthful, but you put your thoughts into your body, right? They're just places where it goes. The liver and Eastern medicine is a big one for that, but actually every organ corresponds to different emotions. So this is a bit off topic, but if you have a lot of fear in your life and you kind of keep internalizing that, it'll affect your kidneys, right? That's what they'd say in Eastern medicine. If you have a lot of grief and sadness and you keep internalizing that, it'll affect your lungs. There's a whole system of correspondences that we have, understanding of how these different emotions affect different parts of the body. But that's what happens when you internalize it. So we have this kind of sense to flee from the feeling. And in fleeing, it's like your awareness kind of flees and you pretend, you black out, you pretend that this stuff isn't happening and isn't bothering you, right? You're tricking yourself. Now, the other way to handle level 2 is to get that stress, let it come into your body, and then you get it out, which was our lady, tension in the jaw, shaking of the hands. How else do people metabolize stress this way? How else do we process it? The shaking of the hands is good, right? Shaking of the body in general. Sometimes people actually get tremors, right? Their hand will start shaking, and it's not even the clench thing. It's just like involuntary. And we see actually a lot of neurological conditions can have some root where there's a stress factor causing it. So that's pretty interesting. Another one is letting out a lot of air, forceful exhalations. So we have different versions of that, like sighing, right? So this would be a little bit different. This is slightly less aggressive, right? The lady waiting to go, I can't. And then she's like, she's more of a fighter, right? Like kind of aggressive stress response. And then we also have sighing, maybe she was waiting to go. And then it's a little bit different personality showing itself, right? A different color on the lens. And then we also have other forceful expulsions of air, like shouting, right? Swearing. Sometimes if you need to shout, you shout, you filter it through a swear word. It's a very strong stress reliever. It really is. When I'm walking around at night in the dark, by the way, which we use candlelight at night for our circadian rhythm, which is really great, but it also makes it hard to see the Legos on the floor. So, you might hear a muffled curse word come out of me if I step on a Lego at the wrong time when I was just trying to get a drink of water with my little candle. It happens. It happens. You got to let it out, right? Let it out. So we have shouting. Another one is laughter. Some people laugh a lot as their stress response. Very interesting to see this, to see this happen. So what's going on here? We've got a progression. Level 1 is the whole world is stressful out there. I'm going to freeze in here and isolate myself from that because anything can trigger me. Anything can basically break me. I don't like it. I don't want it. I'm pretty fragile at this point, to be honest. Level 2 is, you know what? I can take it. I'm resilient, right? I'm going from fragile to resilient. And level 2 has to do again with getting out in the world, letting those stressors come in and affect you. And you see them, they're stressors, you feel it. It's like, and then you either deny that you feel it, right? And stuff it away, or you process it and you let it out, right? Now, the big image or metaphor for this is if you've ever seen the Wolverine movies or Wolverine comic books, right? And maybe you haven't seen these movies or you're not into Marvel superheroes or whatever, that's fine. But it's kind of become a thing in our public consciousness is the Wolverine, he heals really fast. He's got a very fast healing ability and he gets shot a lot. And they do these in the movies where he'll get shot. Somebody will shoot him in the head, but his bones are made out of metal, right? So the bullet just kind of lodges in his forehead and then his body will just push the bullet out. And then you see the wound just close up, right? So that's Wolverine being able to take an insult or a trauma and it just hits him and then he pushes it back out. And this would be this level 2 type skill in terms of stress resilience. So when you have these bullets coming in, like this lady, her bullet was she was trying to get across the street and she couldn't, right? Oh, bullet. And the way she did that, now that was her version of kind of pushing that out. It's going to help her process it faster, right? Keeping things internalized is kind of like Wolverine just having the bullet hit his metal skull, doesn't break his brain or anything, right? But it just stays there, doesn't go anywhere. And he's like, no, I'm fine. Well, you got something stuck in your head, buddy. No, I'm fine. Okay, so we need to develop that. Those are sub-levels within level 2. You need to understand that. Okay, the Wolverine's a really good image for that. And then number 3, right, we get to a different image, which I'll explain in just a moment. So level 3 is when you go out into the world, right? Of course, you're not hiding it at home and you go out into the world and you know that there are stressors, right? Of course, there's all this stuff going on. But what happens in level 3 is you start to get a different understanding and a different view of what is happening. So instead of you being the center of your universe and all these things are happening to you, right? You start to just observe what's going on and see yourself as part of a larger whole so that you're not personally affected by these things. So when she looks at the traffic, it's an interesting shift in the mental narration. It's not, I can't get through, etc., right? The traffic is blocking me. It's a different shift when you look and you go, I am traffic. I am a part of this situation. I'm co-creating this. Right? And now you're observing, you're taking accountability for your own role in it. Of course, you're taking the pressure off yourself. You're doing some very good low amplitude Buddhism type management of your desires, right? You're grasping an aversion because the higher of a desire you have, if it's like, I really got to get across the street, then every time that doesn't happen, the more suffering, the more stress you're going to feel, right? So we lower our expectations. We take a longer view. We start to develop what's called patience, right? Which means being happy even though you don't have what you want, right? That's patience. Not suffering just because your thing hasn't happened yet. That's patience. It takes time to develop this, right? So you develop patience, you develop a wider understanding of what's going on, a broader view of all the different pieces of the system that you're in, and you start to see things from other people's perspectives. And in that way, we start to develop compassion, empathy, forgiveness. So when other people aren't stopping to let you through, you don't see them and think that they're just blowing by to make your life hard, which they're not. They're most likely oblivious to you. Right? And you realize that and you go, oh, that person's doing their own thing. And what's really interesting is when that starts to happen, we can start to get into more of a playful state about life. Some people do this naturally. If you've ever met somebody who's very like go with the flow type person, and it takes so much to ruffle them and they're not internalizing and stuffing it down, right? They're actually just having fun. I've got mentors like this, friends like this, who they're in all kinds of frustrating and just ridiculously stressful situations, but they're seeing it as a dance. They're seeing it as something to play with. and they're maintaining that headspace, that attitude. They're at level 3 in terms of their stress resilience, right? They're in the flow. So level 1, we freeze, hide in our house, right? Level 2, we have fight or flight. Yeah. Level 3, we have flow. So these all start with F. That's cute. That's convenient, right? We have freeze, fight or flight, flow. But you can try to figure out in different situations, where are you in that ladder, in that paradigm of levels? Are you able to flow with certain types of problems, certain types of stressors, right? So maybe, for example, okay, maybe you go to work and you have a job and there's stress at the workplace and it doesn't really get under your skin. It doesn't rattle you, right? You don't feel it and go, or need to take a break and take some space and calm yourself down. You just get some stressors, some challenges, and you're in this headspace, you're in this environment, you have coworkers or colleagues or whatever it is, and it's supportive and there's a culture there and you're part of that culture and it's more of a flow culture. So when little things happen, you go, hey, no biggie, here's how we're going to get around that. Or, this is a challenge. I don't have an easy answer for this. That's not going to break me at all. Let's think about it from some different angles. Let's brainstorm. Let's talk to some people, right? And you're very open and playful and curious about stressors. But then you go to a different domain, like you finish work and you go home and maybe you've got a toddler or something there. Or maybe there's an elderly relative that you're caring for or whoever you're in a relationship with or whatever it is. And there's somebody in a different part of your life and you don't have that level 3 stress capability, right? It's more level 2 or level 1, right? You go home, level 1 is like you go home, see that person and just right to your bedroom or wherever you hang out, right? And you just hide in there, right? Try to avoid the person. Level 2 would be you get home, you see that person, and then they're saying things to you that are stressful and triggering and all that. And you haven't developed that level 3 understanding of putting yourself in their position and just total empathy and all this, right? So you're have a limited perspective and you feel attacked, which is kind of what happens with stress. So you're in that level 2 state, and then you're, you make me so mad, kind of thing, or you're just stuffing emotions down and then doing other types of behavior like emotional eating, or maybe you're addicted to some kind of passive escapism, like, you're just scrolling social media or something as a way to kind of like try to get your brain back. There's all these different ways people self-medicate when they're in that level 2 stress thing. So maybe in one environment, like at work or wherever, you're in level 3 and you're just flowing with life and problems come at you, and you get home or somewhere else and it's level 2, all of a sudden your abilities change depending on the situation. So if this is happening for you, I would encourage you to look at the places where you really shine and then try to figure out what's different between that and the other places, right? Because you're clearly capable in one area of having a higher level of stress resilience. So this level 3, it's really quite interesting. I talked about level 2 is like Wolverine with the bullets popping out of his head, right? Level 3 is more like the Matrix, more like Neo. And there's this great part in that first Matrix movie where all these bullets are coming and he's kind of realized his power here, his potential. And he just, like that. And all the bullets just freeze. They never hit him in the first place. And I would offer there's a massive difference between being able to have a bullet hit you and you regenerate and spit it out, which is great. You survived, right? You're resilient. There's a massive difference between that and the ability to just stop and they're not hitting you at all. And it's not because you're hiding in your house. It's because you're out in the world, and what you've actually done is you've realized that there's an illusion. There are no bullets, right? There is no spoon, to keep going back to that kind of Matrix theme. There is no stressor. It's an interpretation. It's something you've decided, right? We come in with a frame, and then you start to disentangle your own frames around the things that give you stress, because that's where the power is. That's where the leverage is. Really quite interesting. So we go from freeze, level 1, fight or flight, level 2, flow, level 3. And this is where we start to really be able to dance with life. Not an easy place to maintain, right? That's the nature of flow. If you try to squeeze onto that mindset, it squirts out like water, right? You can't hold on to it and keep it by gripping tighter and tighter. You have to actually relax your mind and release your mind and start to, one of the ways to do that is start to identify the things that are bothering you and then start figuring out why. How is that conflicting with the narrative story you're telling your own self about how life should be or what you deserve or what's happening to you or whatever? There's a lot of reframes. I'm not going to go into every single one in this video, of course. This is to give you a high level view, level 1, level 2, level 3. Let's see where you're at, right? And the ability to shift and grow through this, which again can be very tricky. This is something that you have physiological limitations on because it's not always easy to advance through these levels when you're still wildly inflamed or you've got gut dysbiosis or you've got all kinds of pathogens and things that are tinkering with your brain chemistry, which they do, right? That makes it very hard. It's kind of like if I, start smashing my hand on the desk and try to maintain level 3 cool, collected, oh, this is interesting. How curious. What's that? The pain is very loud. It makes it really hard, right? When we get into pain mode, we start to zoom very tightly in on an immediate short-term fix of how do I stop this pain, not how do I grow as a person, right? How do I go from becoming fragile to resilient to what they call anti-fragile, which is a wonderful term. This is a Nassim Taleb term. It's now sweeping through the way people understand growth and think, because this is a fact of life, especially when you start looking at medicine and healing. You actually want to get to a place where your body becomes anti-fragile, your mind becomes anti-fragile, meaning small doses of stress. You don't just bounce back. You actually take that small dose of stress and you internalize it and you alchemize it, and you start to become smarter about emotionally and intellectually and physically smarter about how you handle that. And your body becomes even more capable and more strong and more robust for having been exposed to that. This is a path of wisdom, ultimately. It's really interesting because when people come in, especially they come into my group, I have a group, Modern Vitality Solutions and Support. Maybe you've heard it in other videos. I'll explain more in this video if you're kind of new here. But when people come into the group, oftentimes they're focused on one thing or two things, like a couple symptoms or a certain disease diagnosis they have. And what's really interesting is as we unpack those things and we start to take a very whole systems look, it turns out in order to get better at that, we have to get better at some of the other aspects of life, right? And yes, there's supplements, there's herbs, there's breathing practices, there are physical things you can be doing. And at the same time, as soon as your body starts to become more resilient, you take that space too, and you let your mind evolve. And I watch and observe this very interesting phenomenon of spiritual evolution and growth that happens to people as they go through this process. It's not just about your immune system physically, like macrophages and pathogens and biofilms. That's a little piece. But also your immune system has to do with your boundaries, right? Which also includes how you relate to other people. I've done other videos on this, 4 stages of spiritual development: immune, digestive, neuroadrenal, blood circulation. All these things have personal growth attached to them. And ultimately, when we look at this, it's not just a journey to get our symptoms down or get our lab numbers looking better or whatever it is. The journey is to start getting your life back, and also not just get your life back to where you're doing the things that you wanted to do, that you missed, things you used to love doing, things you had to start saying no to, right? You get back to all that stuff and you continue growing now. You use that momentum and you continue growing more wisdom, more self-awareness, and you get to that level 3 of stress resilience where now you actually have a perspective where you can start to help and guide and support other people, which is where we start to ripple out a little bit more wisdom into the world, because we're not gripped at the steering wheel of life waiting for traffic to stop for us. Right? So this lady I watched, she was clearly in level 2, right? But she was doing a good job in level 2. She was doing a very good job. She wasn't stuffing it down like that. She was at least letting it out. And when you're in level 2, that is an awesome distinction to make. It's a really good first step. If you're dealing with complex chronic health conditions, you don't have to struggle with this by yourself. We've got a great group, outstanding people. We're international. We're having these kinds of conversations and more every single day. I have a process where I'm taking people through stages 1, 2, 3, 4. You can be in our vault. You can look at our videos, interact with those. You can start to get a sense of where you're at in terms of your own healing development. You want to get your bearings so you can figure out like where you're going. You got to know where you are to know where you're going. And that's a lot of what we do in our vault. Again, the group's free to join as a guest. You can come in there, at least for a short term, ask me anything you want. I'm going to be happy to give you my perspective. And I keep the group kind of cozy so that I know who's coming in and I can give very comprehensive and specific answers. So it does tend to fill up because I keep it on the cozy side. If you apply and your application looks really good, by the way, the application's down in the description, right where it would be, you'll find it. If your application looks really good, I'll get you in as soon as I can. There is usually a wait, could be a week, could be 2 weeks, could be a month, could be a couple months. Depends on what's going on with the group and how many people are ahead of you in line. I do try to give everybody their fair turn though. So there's your invitation. I hope this video helps you. Keep an eye on your levels, right? 1, 2, 3, where are you at in terms of your stress resilience? Are you in different levels depending on the context? And can you learn from that? Can you grow, right? And then also as you heal, as you get better working through the stages, that's a good chance, an opportunity to start to expand on that as well. All right, let's get you feeling better. Cheers.